Hi everyone. I hope you all are well. So my last video was about expertise in witchcraft, where kind of the focus of the video was basically me making the argument that expertise is a moving target. So, I mean, you can watch the video. I won't necessarily reiterate it for you. I think maybe it was a little bit misinterpreted by some folks. I wasn't saying that experts don't exist or that we shouldn't be striving to learn as much as we can necessarily, or that some people aren't more expert than others, but rather that if you find yourself in a position where you feel like you're the expert, then I think it's kind of our duty to put ourselves in situations where we're pushing ourselves beyond that. I mean, there's always more to learn and more to do. And I was really kind of just thinking about my own situation and thinking about other folks I work with and how, like, you know, you get to a point where you feel bored, like every book is the same and, you know, do I know all there is? And I don't know, like that leads to a kind of plateau that's very tricky to get off of. So that's what that first video was about. And I had said at the beginning that I had a list of things that I had wanted to talk about related to that topic, but I try to post shorter videos just because of how long it takes to upload things, and because I know some folk, you don't necessarily want to sit through like 40 minutes of like me just talking. But folks asked for me to kind of continue on that subject, so I've got the rest of my list here, and I thought I would just touch on a couple of things related that have either come to mind kind of in the comments of that prior video, or just things that have occurred to me subsequently or in that moment that just didn't make it into that first video. So one component of the conversation about expertise that I think also gets a little bit lost, and I want to speak as generally as possible, okay? I'm not talking about any particular kind of witchcraft or any particular community. I think this is just something that's true kind of about people, and it's something I see in pagan and witchcraft spaces and occult spaces too, is, I mean, really, humility, right? I mean, I know words like humility, right, humbleness are kind of, they almost feel a little bit taboo in our spaces, because I think like humility is kind of, it's like a Christian virtue in some ways, and a lot of us, because our craft is so much about building ourselves up and kind of healing ourselves from some of these traumas, particularly past religious traumas, when I talk about the value of humility, I think that makes some people's skin crawl a little bit, which I want to respect. I get that. But I think if we centralize humility as a virtue, kind of in our personal code of conduct out in the world, I mean, it sounds simple, right? But that really serves to keep kind of that arrogance in check. And I do think that, I mean, again, like there are experts that exist out in the space, and being an expert, it does not automatically make somebody arrogant, okay? And I hope we can recognize the difference when somebody is an expert versus when somebody is being arrogant. And they might be both of those things. They might be an arrogant expert, okay? But knowing what you know, asserting what you know, being proud of what you know is not automatically arrogance, okay? I'm talking about folks who kind of use all of that stuff to put down other people or as an excuse to not learn more, etc. So just really practicing and operating in communal spaces with that personal value of humility, I think is the thing that protects against that. And for me, what that looks like is understanding that I'm always a student. There's always stuff that I don't know. When I have the time and the resources and the finances, etc., I try to take classes and go to conferences and go to workshops and go to festivals and learn from others. I read outside of my purview, right? I mean, I'm a Wiccan witch, I'm a Gardnerian witch. There are certain parts kind of in the occult community where I feel like that's my wheelhouse, that's my expertise. But there's lots and lots of stuff outside of that that I'm not an expert. I'm not even like intermediate. I might just be like a straight up beginner. And putting myself in those positions when I can, giving myself the opportunity to learn more, and paying other people their due respect where their expertise surpasses my own. When you're constantly in those spaces, I think it makes your relationship with your own expert wheelhouse a little bit differently. It's hard to kind of be full of yourself if most of your time is spent as a student rather than as a teacher, a coven leader, an expert, whatever thing, whatever pedestal you're on, whether you've put yourself there or other people have put you there. If you very consciously humble yourself, take on that student role consciously, I found that it makes my relationships with other people, but also with the subject itself, a lot healthier when we're talking about the things that I am comfortable with, the thing that I am expert at. I don't know, like it makes relating to other people a lot easier. I think about this when I was teaching high school. A lot of kids come in and they think of their teachers, like their teachers are supposed to be experts. They're supposed to be able to, so I was an English teacher, but I'd have kids show up with math homework that they needed help with, or history homework or whatever. And the expectation is that you're a teacher, you know these things. And like I have a high school education, so like a lot of the times I could be helpful, but it's been a long ass time since I've had to balance equations in high school chemistry, right? So like being able to have an honest conversation with a kid about how like, man, it's been a long time since I've done this. I don't know. Let's talk to your chem teacher, or like, here's somebody else who we can go to. And that's, like a really sort of benign example, but watching kids kind of get their head around, oh, like, my one teacher doesn't have to know everything. And that's true for me too. Kind of aside from the unrealistic expectations we impose on children in school. But that's another video for a different channel and a different person. So yeah, humility kind of as a central virtue. I choose to make that a virtue for myself when I am walking in craft spaces and exploring the craft, deepening my own, interacting with other people, etc. And sometimes that means actually going out and like formally making yourself a student of somebody else. Sometimes that means just walking around with what folks call beginner's mind. But I mean, it's cool to be an expert in stuff, and expertise is definitely like a hard-won thing. But I don't think it should be the full picture. So that's one component. Something else that I think, and I've talked about this in other videos, something that I think kind of collectively gets us in trouble where this topic is concerned is we sort of collectively have this idea that teaching, whether that means like running a group or offering classes at your local store or online, or becoming a content creator or writing a book or whatever, we sort of collectively have this idea that that's like the terminal step in anybody's training, regardless of what tradition we're talking about. Like once you know enough, it's time to become a teacher, or it's time to become an author, or it's time to become a professional whatever. Like you're not a real tarot reader unless you're working somewhere and taking money for readings. And I think that this is very rarely explicitly stated anywhere. I think it's just kind of this tacit assumption that people learn to make over years of being in communities. We have this idea that like, okay, like you've been in a coven for X number of years, it's time for you to run one. Or like you've been reading tarot cards for X number of years, it's time for people to start coming to you and giving you money, right? You've been practicing witchcraft for X number of years, when are you going to write a book? Or when are you going to teach a class? And that might be fine. Like for a particular individual who has that proclivity, who has that desire, those aspirations, sometimes that is the next step. And in some traditions, teaching is part of training, and I don't want to dismiss or disparage that, but the idea that that is just the default next step, I think, is a problem, because I don't think that at some point you have to teach, or at some point you have to write, or at some point whatever. I think that maybe overshadows some of the other ways that people work in our magical spaces and contribute to our magical communities. There are lots of ways in which people serve others that don't necessarily entail being at the head of a room. And I think we should actively be telling initiates, students, people, people who kind of come to us for information, that doesn't have to be something that they aspire to. And likewise, just because somebody gives you money for a thing or puts you in charge of the classroom doesn't automatically make you an expert, right? And there was no better place to see this than the school system. Like, just because somebody has a teaching license doesn't mean that they need to be working with kids. Like, I'm sorry, but there it is. And in occult spaces, like, just because somebody's willing to pay you for a tarot reading doesn't mean that you're good at tarot. And I think we know that. But collectively we have this idea that, like, if money is attached to it, or this person has a lot of followers, or somebody's willing to publish the book or pay for the book, the person producing it must be an expert. And, like, we hope those things are true, but we can't assume that they are. And I think sometimes we do. Just because somebody is in charge of a thing or is being paid to do a thing doesn't mean that they should be, maybe, okay? So there's that. And kind of like on a related note, we attach money to expertise in ways that I think are not always helpful. Like, in that same vein, like, I see this particularly in tarot communities, but it shows up in witchcraft spaces too, just because of the overlap there. We have this idea that, like, you're a good tarot reader if you're a professional tarot reader. Like, the best tarot readers are people who make money at it. Like, you must be an expert witch if you're operating a witchcraft store, or if you're writing books, or if people are paying you for spell work or whatever. And sometimes, can you tell I'm ignoring my day job? Shh. Speaking of making money, la la la. We think that that's just something that has to happen. Like, that's how we assert our authenticity, or like how real or how effective we are, is if people are willing to give us money. And I think that that's also a problem. So I just threw a lot of ideas at you really quickly, but folks had asked for a follow-up. There it is. In other more mundane news, I'm still in, like, house hunting flux and thinking about jobs and school, and my brain has kind of been elsewhere. So I know I've been a little bit absent on Instagram, but I'm still around. You can still pre-order the new book. Please do that. It's called The Witch's Path. It has a lot of my feelings in it, including most everything that I just said. I hope you all are well and safe, and I will see you next time.